It's a really difficult thing sometimes, trying to write about one of your favorite things. Sometimes you love a piece of art in a way that's hard to explain. Maybe it changed you, maybe it affirmed you, maybe it encompasses everything you love about a certain genre of a thing. It's the way people say things like, "I just like it," when asked why they like something so much. Sometimes your love for something is so elemental, so deeply sown in the very fiber of your being, that it's kind of like trying to describe why we draw breath, or why the sky is blue or something. Like, sure, yes, there are concrete, actual scientific reasons as to why, but like, why? You know? So here I am, doing something I've been excited to do for a long time. Ever since I began this channel, however difficult it may be to put into words. I'm going to try to tell you why I think Kamen Rider Blade is fucking beautiful, and why it's my favorite show in the Kamen Rider series, and maybe, possibly my favorite show, period. So, like, there's a distinction between favorite and best, right? At least I think so. There are a ton of works that I think are immaculate and perfectly executed that just can't quite hold a candle to other more imperfect things that I personally hold dear. Having a favorite thing is an emotional response to something, right? It's a time and a place that you return to every time you think about it. It's why I like Gremlins 2 more than the first movie. It's why my favorite Metallica album is And Justice for All, even though it doesn't have fucking any bass at all. Sorry. It's why I hold the world record most incendiary, most mind-blowingly hot Zelda take, which is that I like Skyward Sword more than Breath of the Wild. Yep, that's right. I'm unhinged, and none of you can fucking stop me. You're not strong enough, I promise. And so, while I think there are better Kamen Rider shows, specifically ones named Kuga, it is Blade that well and truly has the key to my stupid fucking heart. I love this show with everything in me. It truly is excellent. I think it's got the most fully realized world of any of the first 5 Heisei Rider shows, at least. The plotting is seriously incredible, especially in the second half where things truly get pushed into top gear, and it has hands down the best, most emotional, most memorable ending to any Tokusatsu show I've seen thus far. It is unfuckwithable, alright? But Blade is also deeply flawed. The acting is fucking bizarre at times, the tone is kind of all over the place with some really misplaced comedic moments, and the first few episodes serve as probably the most unfriendly introduction to a show I've seen in a long time. Episode 1 seriously feels like episode 25 of a totally different show, and kind of like a season 2 to a season 1 that never existed. It serves the series later, I think, but when you're first trying to get in, it feels incomprehensible and hostile in a really bizarre way. And I feel like I have to mention the fucking memes. Kamen Rider Blade was the source of a ton of Nico Nico Doga mads, or music anime dogas, and they are fucking incredible. They make fun of everything about these shows, the faces, the line deliveries, but I just find it so impressive and hilarious. I mean, holy shit, the dedication to just goofing on this dumb show. I love it for those things, though, and a lot of those flaws serve to make the show feel like it was made by humans, and not like it's made by some huge company, which it definitely actually is. It's honestly amazing how amateurish the show can feel at times. It feels like a ground-level look at a situation you've only just jumped into partway through. A ton of the fights are filmed in forests, and at times it feels like they're just hanging out and found a cool place to shoot, and they thought, oh, what the hell, let's pull out the monster suits. It's a fascinating vibe for a Kamen Rider show to have, and especially after the last few shows. It's just refreshing in how brutally off-kilter the entire show feels. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, though, and we're still in the preamble, so, I'm sorry about how long this video is going to be. It just is going to be so long. But I wanted to take the chance here to talk frankly about what I generally am going for with these videos and what exactly I'm trying to do with this one. I don't claim to be an authority on anything. I don't want to build a community or anything around just how smart and perfect my takes are. I make these videos to start conversations about a genre I really care about. And I don't want folks to ever get it in their heads that their particular readings of a work are wrong because of any aggressive phrasing that I use or anything. These are long shows. They're definitely about more than just the one thing I harp on about in each video. These videos are just representations of the personal feelings that each show just dredges up inside of me, however positive or negative. Typically, I make these videos while being mindful of your time, so I usually like to zero in on just one huge takeaway that I have with each series, and then just roll with that for the duration of each episode. But this time, I'm allowing myself to be a lot more indulgent and just be a lot more real, and hopefully take myself down a peg about how my taste isn't perfect or anything, and that I just really like some shit that I just like. This is the show I hold most dear, so I figure why the hell not? I'm just gonna let it all out, be super self-indulgent, and try to put everything that I love about Blade inside of one super long thing. So without further ado, here's that. Kamen Rider Blade starts out in probably the most bizarre way of any Kamen Rider series that I've personally had any experience with. In fact, some people might justifiably say that these first few episodes are bad. I mentioned this earlier, but it feels like the start to a second season of a show where season 1 just never existed. We pick up in media res with two writers, Blade and Garen. Kazuma Kenzaki is Kamen Rider Blade, who happens to be the greener of the two, taking after his sort of mentor, Sakia Tachibana. They work for Board, an organization dedicated to anthropology that is now sending the writers to take care of monsters called undead. Once they defeat an undead, the monsters get sealed into cards and are magically assigned a value on the card that lines up with a real-life playing card. Blade goes really hard on this playing card theme, realizing it a bit more fully than Ryuki's sort of trading card gimmick. In Blade, there are 4 writers, each representing a suit of cards. Blade being the spade suit and Garen being the diamond suit. And there are undead that correspond with each suit of cards. This makes the very act of defeating monsters a game that you can kind of follow along with, which increases your personal engagement each episode. Certain category ace cards are used to transform, and then the 2 through 9 cards of each suit are used for attacks via the card readers on the equipment of each rider, like Garen's gun and Blade's blade. The Jack, King, and Queen cards do something a little different later. These attacks combo too, and it's fucking cool as hell. It's honestly amazing how good the design of Blade's gimmick is, and how much the show just doesn't seem to care that much about emphasizing it all that much in the beginning. In the very first episode, the Board HQ our heroes work at is completely annihilated by an undead invasion, and it looks like Garen has something to do with it, which isn't helped by how fucking just absolutely shady he is at the beginning of the show, causing Kenzaki to go into full panic mode because he cares a whole lot about his rider buddy. Kenzaki has returned to the more well-meaning, sweet protagonist after Takumi and Faiz, and while it may seem a bit too soon to return to that, it works super well here because of the immense focus given to each rider in this show. Kenzaki works as an incredible baseline for the other 3 riders to bounce off of, and for that reason making Kenzaki more of a Godai than a Takumi works wonderfully. In the case of the very first arc, Kenzaki is mostly characterized as being intensely, almost comically confused by the situation that's arisen from the first episode. He's never known Tachibana to be a traitor, and at times just outright refuses the possibility. Kenzaki's also got a little bit of a dark past, having parents that died in a fire while he had to watch, so I think the guy is understandably a little desperate to keep close friends around for as long as possible. To help Kenzaki in not being so confused and distraught, we've got two buddy pals that apparently every Kamen Rider is assigned upon leading a series. One being Kenzaki and Tachibana's longtime co-worker at board, Hirose Shiori, a super smart and capable character in her own right, led to action by the destruction of board as well as a motivation to search for her missing father, who was a researcher for the company. Shirai Kotaro tags along with our heroes as well as giving them a place to crash at, having a unique angle as a comedic relief character as well as being the point of view character for a little while, with him being a writer trying to put together a novel about the Kamen Riders. So with this trio, we've got a great setup to build off of, with Kenzaki at the forefront trying to figure out what the hell is going on with his friend. While we figure out pretty quickly that Tachibana was in fact not the culprit for setting the undeads loose on board, and while Kenzaki understands and forgives him nearly immediately, more problems arise in the form of Garen actually wanting to get to their chief, Karasuma, to try to ask some important questions about the rider systems. Tachibana claims that the rider systems actually break down their bodies and kill them over time, to Kenzaki's surprise, and from this point on, the first act of Blade actually kind of shifts focus from being a story about Kenzaki and his confusion and his investigation into Tachibana, picking up the pieces from Board's destruction, to one more about Tachibana being consumed with fear, and desperately gunning for any answers that way help quell that inside of him. As this is all happening, we're introduced to a third rider, Kamen Rider Chalice, living with Kotaro's sister and her daughter Amane at their owned restaurant. Aikawa Hajime is a wanderer that's seemingly settled into a pretty nice deal for himself. Dude's kinda strange and standoffish, but he's sweet and protective of the people that have given him a place to stay, and it is Hajime that takes up a sort of Takumi-esque role of the guarded, emotionally distant rider. This setup is honestly so good that it could be its own entire rider show, so it's really cool and fascinating that Hajime's whole deal is actually wrapped up within this initial story of intrigue regarding Board. The twist with Hajime becomes clear pretty quickly. He's actually an undead, and on top of that, he was actually present for the death of Amane's father, and sought out his family to watch over. So it actually wasn't quite by chance that he landed this living situation. As he encounters and interacts with the established cast, he'll stir up emotions positive and negative. He'll raise suspicions, as well as provide relief in the occasional battle here and there. The conflict of feelings about Hajime from the rest of the cast is one of the best parts of the show, in my opinion. His identity as an undead becomes clear pretty quickly to the rest of the cast too, because of his green blood, which, by the way, is a pretty great choice visually, so as to not prolong that whole revelation for the characters, and the green blood is a great choice as an instant signifier of undead status, as the line between human and undead continues to get blurrier later on. Chalice is a fantastic addition to the show, and that feeling only increases as the show goes on. Also, his relationship with Amane is just the purest, sweetest thing. Amane is a great kid character, and she really helps to round out Hajime's intended edges. So for the first act of the show, which I'm drawing the line at around episodes 1 through 15, these are our three riders. As I said a little earlier, the central question of did Tachibana destroy Board HQ gets swapped out as early as episode 6 or so, with a new question, which is how do we help Tachibana? Because of the fear of bodily destruction I mentioned earlier, he becomes incredibly susceptible to being taken advantage of, and he most certainly does get taken advantage of by the villainous Isaka. Isaka is a mysterious man researching the undead and the riders, and he's working on a super secret project that he needs Tachibana's help with, and the way he'll repay Tachibana is with this fucking weird seaweed bath thing that makes him more powerful for a time by helping him let go of his fear and become all like badass and shit. As you can probably put together, the seaweed bath is a bit of snake oil, and the fear of bodily harm that Tachibana has around his rider form is pretty much fueled by that fear, which only heightens just how much he needs help from his friends. Plots like these are kind of where the structure of shows like Kamen Rider really excel, I think, because it gives you something to worry about on the side, while other characters, in this case Kenzaki and Hajime, are having to worry about undeads being a more immediate threat every week. So the showrunners kind of get to have their cake and eat it too, by advertising the shit out of some toys and card gimmicks, while also creating a good overarching plot line for the characters to try and figure out. It's not like it's so easy to talk Tachibana out of not trusting the floating evil dude in a trench coat and sunglasses. Dude's scared. Had any and all structure taken out from under him. And now he's turning to some pretty shady means of becoming more powerful in spite of his fear. It can definitely be read as a sort of a addiction allegory, and I think that's honestly a pretty cool thing for a show like this to be doing. Eventually this culminates in Isaka needing Tachibana to kill the elusive Category Ace Undead, the fourth and final Ace card not currently attached to a rider. Also, I forgot to mention, but yes, Chalice does count, and I'll give you 3 guesses as to what his suit of cards is supposed to be. The Category Ace, being the source of power for an entire rider system, proves to be a rotten son of a bitch to seal, and it's during the whole arc dealing with this that it's revealed that, Isaka's an undead too. The Peacock Undead, to be more specific. And this is honestly a pretty big moment, not just for this arc, but for the whole series, as Isaka, other than Hajime, is the first undead that can disguise as a human and communicate clearly to the heroes. It's not given a whole lot of focus right now, but this is something that becomes a lot bigger of a deal as the show goes on. In this way, the undead as a whole cast of monsters resembles kind of a mix between the mirror monsters from Ryuki and the Grongi from Kuga. They all basically have the goal of human annihilation in one way or another. It's just that some aren't able to do the whole human thing and aren't given any speaking roles, just serving as monster of the week fodder, as some high-level ones are given a whole-ass character, becoming a lot more than just a monster of the week. It's a really cool dynamic mixing the two like this, especially since up to now in Heisei we've only really been given one or the other. Isaka's goal here is to create a whole new rider belt for the final of the 4 card suits, and to make it stronger than any of the other 3 riders. To accomplish this, he needs that Category Ace captured, which Garen manages to actually do after a grueling battle. At this point, Isaka gets on some full-on shocker bullshit and starts testing the belt out on a whole bunch of young men to try to find a perfect candidate for the strongest rider ever. Tachibana, in his constant pursuit of quelling his fears and becoming strong once again, ends up getting in way too deep with Isaka and ends up wrapping his girlfriend in all of this, who gets promptly threatened and then murdered when she tries to help him get out of this mess. This is one of the only story decisions that I actually find to be fairly annoying, what with the whole female death for male development thing. Regardless, this finally snaps Tachibana out of this shit, and he finally decides for himself that he wants out and he can face his fears on his own, culminating in a final battle with Isaka where he destroys the undead decisively, overcoming everything holding him back thus far. It is at this point that we enter the second act of the story, shifting focus from Tachibana's internal conflict to that of a high school student, Kamijo Mutsuki, one of the many victims of Isaka's testing to create the final rider. The Angle. Mutsuki is a fucking fascinating character, and exactly the type of character nerd bros would probably hate. He's indecisive, kind of annoying, his arc is long, like really long. I fucking adore Mutsuki though, and I think he completes the cast in a really great way, by being someone not bound by duty or anything to fight. He's quite literally haunted by the ghost of what's happened to him against his will, and his story is probably the strongest parallel to Hongo's from the original Kamen Rider, with the huge difference of being not nearly as well adjusted or strong-willed as Hongo, because, fuck, I mean, who could be? There's a really important scene earlier on in his arc, as Garen's arc with Isako is ending, where Mutsuki was saved by Kenzaki from an undead by chance, at which point the two start becoming friends through many chance meetings. One of those meetings being this really goofy subplot for an episode or so where Kenzaki gets framed for a grocery store robbery. The show's weird. This relationship with Kenzaki inadvertently spirals Mutsuki into this weird wish fulfillment dynamic with the Liangle belt, pursuing the power because he wants to emulate the riders that he admires so much. It's quickly made clear that the Spider Undead wasn't properly sealed though, as that motherfucker is still mostly in control every time Mutsuki transforms into Liangle. The Spider Undead is also just able to make the belt teleport to Mutsuki no matter what. It's really goofy. Show's weird. This sort of weird forced possession shit is incidentally what makes Mutsuki really fucking strong as Liangle though. As he kicks a ton of ass everywhere, which puts Kenzaki and Tachibana in a really tough place. They don't want to kick Mutsuki's ass because he's just a kid. In fact, he's such a kid that they don't want him to fight at all. No matter how useful he may be in combat, everyone would just rather that he focus on his sweet girlfriend in basketball practice. So they kind of just try to deal with it. And their way of dealing with it is, having the newly character-developed Tachibana take little Mutsuki under his wing to try to mentor him on his new powers. I love this Tachibana and Mutsuki dynamic so much. It is so good. And in the midst of all this Mutsuki business going on, more and more high-level undead start showing up, including one played by Kaoru from Garo. That fucking rules, though it is far from the biggest cameo in the show. And if all this wasn't enough for one arc in this show, we get the introduction of Shima, an actual kind, helpful undead that wants to try and quell the spider undead within Mutsuki. And he also comes bearing an upgrade for Kenzaki in the form of the Rouse Absorber, giving him access to Jack form, which is pretty sick. Thanks, dude! So with the appearance of Shima and the more advanced undead that appear right before him, some new information about the monsters start to come to light. See, the undead are actually all representatives of 52 different species of animal, insect or otherwise, and they participated in a thing called the battle fight 10,000 years ago. The winner of the battle fight can wish for the world to be remade in their image. The winner of this particular battle fight was the human undead, obviously, and so that's why the world is mostly populated by humans in the current era. The stuff with the battle fight lends a whole lot to Blade's world building, and the fact that it's such ancient history associated with the suits and number values of playing cards lends a lot to the aesthetic design of the show too. I just always appreciate when one of these shows can meld together its toy line and storyline to make something super cohesive, and this piece of world building does a whole lot to cement that and make it all just lock in. There's one more wrinkle to the battle fight backstory, and it starts to rear its head as the Mutsuki plotline begins to boil over. It becomes clearer and clearer as the undead get more advanced. They start to act differently around Hajime than they do with our other riders. At first, that can be chalked up to the fact, Hajime is an undead like them, so obviously they're weirded out that he's fighting against them to protect some humans. But then the difference in interaction starts to more resemble fear and animosity. And then Shima starts calling Hajime by a different name than either Hajime or Chalice. He starts calling him Joker. Mutsuki starts to really waver in his control of the spider undead, and it seems like our heroes are unable to help him, just like with Tachibana earlier. However, this is definitely more of a coming-of-age developmental thing, rather than someone struggling with their demons, which can almost be harder to deal with in certain situations. Like, what do you do when your friend is being taken advantage of at a huge turning point in their life, specifically? Like, at the end of their adolescence? If things go well, then the bond grows stronger than ever, unbreakable even. And if things go badly, then it seals their fate and it'll be harder than ever to get through. Paths diverge and you lose a friend. Shima tries to salvage Mutsuki's wavering soul by using Liangle's power to seal himself away. By virtue of being the tarantula undead, he's actually the category king of clubs, so having that card in Mutsuki's disposal would probably do some work in subduing the spider's ace, giving Mutsuki more control. How does this actually work? I don't fucking know, I'm not a scientist, it just does. Show's weird, gotta roll with it after a certain point. Did Shima's big sacrifice work? Well, right after his sacrifice, Mitsuki starts acting all weird and he wanders away, so it's kind of up in the air. And it's at this point that we reach around episode 30. And I'll be totally honest, this is a really, really fucking weird moment in the show, because it is at episode 31 that the head writer changes, and in a really surprising and rare move for Kamen Rider, the opening theme changes too. Episode 31 brings with it a new, fresh plotline and a lot of forward momentum, making episode 28's Shima sacrifice and light plot detail in episodes 29 and 30 a sort of makeshift season finale, almost, which just kinda, I don't know, feels fucking weird. Also, it doesn't help that Toshiki Inoue just came out of nowhere to write episodes 29 and 30, and those are just two of the most over-the-top comedic episodes, and there's a random Garen Jack form upgrade. I don't know, like, it's really, really just odd and just off, you know? Episodes 1 through 30 are hardly a complete show, or even a complete thought. The head writer is credited as Shoji Imai, but I seriously cannot find much about the guy on the internet, which is seriously kind of bizarre. There's a lot of hearsay about the production of Blade being particularly troubled, and a change in writer and opening usually kind of signals to me that sales and ratings were pretty bad too. Was the opening arc really that weird? Was the show actually bad all along? Do the remaining 19 episodes even bring it home? Well, honestly, I do think that the show being really off-putting at first probably did do a lot to deter viewers. There was also the sort of meme quality, which I can only imagine at the time only attracted ironic viewers and weirdos that actually managed to like the damn show, rather than, you know, like masses of children, which is what the show needed to actually survive. And that's definitely a failing of the show for sure. There's not much doubt about that. Was the show bad all along? God, honestly, who can say? I feel like this sort of thing gets brought up every time a show does badly, and honestly, there are a ton of good shows that don't do well sales-wise, so that's not exactly a measure of quality, but it is a measure of trends. And I can definitely tell you that we never really got another show like Blade after it ended. There are probably a couple of shows that I can name now that remind me of Blade, but nothing quite like it. Do the remaining 19 episodes bring it home? Oh, hell yeah. I adore the second part of the show with everything in me, but I have to say I think that there's kind of a sentiment out there that the show only really gets good at 31 and onward, and I completely disagree with that. The Shoji Imai episodes are amazing and unique. There is not a lot of Kamen Rider quite like it. It is full-on soap opera at times. A lot of the action is filmed in forests, and some of the first few episodes even have some snow fights. How often do you see shit like that in Kamen Rider? You really don't. And most importantly, these episodes gave us this amazing cast. All four writers are so good and have such great dynamics with each other. Kenzaki and Tachibana are a super classic Rider 1 and 2 duo reminiscent of the original show. Mutsuki and Tachibana have an incredible mentor-mentee relationship, and I love how comedic Mutsuki's encounters with Kenzaki end up being, with Kenzaki constantly being framed as someone that's gotta figure shit out, even though he's usually the one saving everyone else's skin. That's funny. Everything is super Rider-centric here, but Kotaro and Hirose really bring a lot of volume and variation to the show, by both being comedic and dramatic forces in everything. Hirose with her conflicts with Board, which we'll get into soon, and Kotaro with his oddball antics as well as his genuine concern with Hajime being an undead and being so close to his sister and niece. And Hajime, holy shit Hajime. He may not be the focus of any of the big arcs just yet, but he is a consistent and wonderful presence in the show. He is just outstanding. So much of the show hinges on you caring about him and his distant heart. He wants to care and be cared for by the people around him, and he protects Amane and her mother with an emotional distance. But he's obviously the most tender and safe around them. He's antagonistic towards the other writers, but Kenzaki's persistence breaks him down and causes him to start to trust even the human writers. He's genuinely just wants to understand humanity and their love and compassion. but being what he is, he feels like he just can't. He can't open up for fear of hurting everything around him. All 4 of these riders are distinct, and feel like versions of things we've seen before in Kamen Rider, and particularly the first 4 Heisei shows preceding this. There are a ton of elements that I could just list out right here to connect the dots and show what exactly Blade is spinning from different shows in Kamen Rider's legacy, but that might be a little bit too much for this already super long video essay. What I'm saying here is that all of this is just from the first 30 episodes, and honestly, I kind of just want to cut things off here and say that if you're interested in what I've been talking about here, and want to check out the show for yourself, I'd really urge you to check this thing out. I fucking love it, and while I haven't completely finished my thoughts, as most of them come to a head in part 2, I feel like I just gotta take the chance to tell you to watch this show now, and maybe check out the rest of this essay later if you don't want everything given away for you. And without further ado, let's transition a little bit. At episode 31, Sho Aikawa takes over as head writer of Kamen Rider Blade, and what follows is 19 episodes of pure inertia. Story events hurtling towards an inevitable conclusion that the show keeps trying to fake you out on. What lies beyond is quite possibly my favorite section of episodes in any Kamen Rider show ever, and it comes with sheer delight that I'm finally talking about it on my dumb YouTube show. You can feel the change immediately. Plotlines burst forth in a dizzying fashion. Shima lost, and now Mutsuki is at the whims of the Spider Undead and gunning for a collection of a full set of cards to maintain status as the strongest rider. There's a Category King Undead of the Spade suit running around and raising hell, and before Kenzaki can deal with him, a new class of not quite undead, the Trial Undeads, start to rear their head. The Trials are targeting Kenzaki and calling out to him by name for some odd reason, and on top of all this, Hajime's true nature as the Joker is revealed. The Joker is in most cases a trump or wild card. It can take the form of any other card in the deck, therefore being one of the most powerful cards you can get your hands on. Likewise, Hajime is able to take the form of any undead by using his belt, the only belt that isn't tied to any rider system by board. In fact, his form as Chalice is actually the form of the Mantis Undead, and his form as Hajime is the form of the Human Undead, the winner of the last battle fight. For most of the cast, this completely changes their outlooks on the guy. Hajime becomes way more fearsome with this information, and especially with the added fact that if the Joker wins the battle fight, it causes a full board reset. Everything dies. Also, being the Joker kind of puts you in a werewolf state where you can't exactly control your violent tendencies, and because of a few different reasons, Hajime is starting to lose control of those tendencies, as he used to have them before, so, that's fun and chill. Everything is fine. So naturally, Tachibana, Mutsuki, and the rest have their trust shaken in Hajime, and even if they did trust him completely, they can't let him live to the end of the current battle fight. It's understandable, but not for Kenzaki. He knows Hajime as he is, for his actions, so he rejects the very notion that Hajime must be killed for human survival. We'll circle back to this at the end here, but this struggle in regards to the Joker and the end of the battle fight serves as the backbone for the rest of the show, the tension that everything else dances on top of. Let's just carry on from the ending of part 1 and talk about Mutsuki some more. At the beginning of part 2, it seems as if Shima's sacrifice was ultimately useless, as the Spider Undead is now fully in control of Mutsuki and influencing his every move. This failure really rings out as a emotional gut punch for the next several episodes, or at least it did for me. It really just bummed my ass out. And the Spider Undead just also totally just makes Mutsuki look like a dick in this fedora and chain outfit thing. It's absolutely despicable. I feel like this section in Mutsuki's story might frustrate some viewers, as it can kind of feel redundant and overwhelm you with a sense of, do they even know where they're going with this? But fellas, they did know where they were going, or at least I think they did. This whole failing puts the onus on Mutsuki to come into his own as a writer and fully take the Liango power for himself. and I really appreciate how long it takes him to actually do that. If he was the main character of the show, it would be done by episode 6 or something, and if he were a more minor character, he'd probably be dead by now. But this way, we get to see him struggle and try to adapt while also being the wild card, kinda like Oja, Kaiza type figure that the show kinda needs in this section to up the ante a little bit. This also kinda keeps him away doing his own thing while Kenzaki and Tachibana figure out stuff with Board, and Hajime tries to not end the world as Joker. So for the 30s or so, he's mostly just causing trouble and being a hassle, until he finally gets to the point where he needs to only seal one more undead. Along the way, Mutsuki managed to befriend someone while possessed by the spider. This friend was the tiger undead, and being an undead, she really loves fighting and being a bastard. Usual undead shit. She starts to side with Mutsuki so as to be on the winning team, but she pretty quickly figures out that Mutsuki isn't supposed to be like this, especially not with his incredibly sweet girlfriend showing up to give him some lunch. At a different point in the story, she finds out that the whole battle fight that they're currently in is a sham. More on that later. And since she's an undead that's all about honor and all that good stuff, this really shakes her personally, and she decides to try to help Mutsuki take care of that spider problem. See, she's Mutsuki's category queen, and she might just be the push he needs to take this power for himself. After tricking Mutsuki into a mortal clash and some additional tricky planning on the side, she seals herself and gets the spider undead to exit Mutsuki for one final battle, for dominance. With the help and encouragement of basically the entire cast of the show, Mutsuki strikes down the spider decisively and takes Langle for himself. At episode, 42, that really did take a while. I'm kind of joking about it taking so long, I mean it does, but seriously, Mutsuki as a character would be way weaker if it didn't take him this long to own his strength as a rider. He needed that struggle and that ownership of not only his shortcomings but also his trauma of being kidnapped and made into a rider against his will. The arc with Isaka towards the beginning of the show was heavily centered on Tachibana, but Mutsuki suffered too, and arguably more so because he didn't even know what he was getting into with the whole thing. It was a hasty experiment by someone that wanted to advance his tech quickly, and whenever you do that, when you commit to forward momentum without caring for who you hurt, you only really leave that pain behind, not progress. Mutsuki, under the influence of the spider, would go on and on about how he's the strongest rider and how he's unparalleled. But it is right here, at the ending of this character arc, where we finally get the truth, with no posturing, straight from Mutsuki's mouth. As he clings to his girlfriend with all of his friends watching, Mutsuki is left mourning a friend that sacrificed himself for him. He can only lament about how he wishes he was stronger. Zooming out from this small moment within Mutsuki, though, we do see that he's surrounded by his friends that helped him throughout this entire time. This is his true strength. However, to pivot to a different point, since we're kind of tackling this non-linearly by just talking about the three biggest storylines, there's a question that needs to be answered about what really happened here. What force unsealed the undead? Why is the battle fight happening now, of all times? Well, folks, direct your attention to the big ol' company Board. I don't really like to make too much of a habit of referencing my own videos, but if you've seen my Ultra 7 video, you'll know that I spoke on how that show took a lot of time to warn viewers about the dangers of scientific progression run amok. How sometimes the yearning for a perfect utopic future can be ruinous to the very world you're trying to push forward. There are some pretty loud echoes of that in this show, with the revelations behind Kenzaki and Tachibana's employer, just like what I mentioned earlier with Asaka and his development of the Liangle Belt. See, it was actually a Board researcher, Yoshito Hirose, the father of our good friend Shiori, that undid the Undead Seal, instigating the new battle fight. His research on the undead is all towards developing human immortality, a goal he came to after the death of his wife from an unspecified illness. Yoshito has been in pursuit of this goal for seemingly the entire time while the events of the show have been playing out, which starts to feel pretty bad when you think about how many times Shiori has mentioned or even gone out to look for her father since the show started and Board HQ was destroyed. It's here that Board starts to truly embody an antagonistic position in the show. There's little humanity in their actions, despite how well-intentioned they may seem to be. It's enough to fool our heroes too, as Kenzaki and Tachibana clearly feel duty-bound to the organization. In fact, at this point in the story, Tachibana actually starts working with Yoshito Hirose, even though he's clearly out of his mind and playing with fire in the creation of his trial undeads. An almost Terminator 2 tier strain of unstoppable undead, incapable of being sealed away like other undead. The point behind their pursuit of Kenzaki is to seemingly stop him from becoming a rider for much longer, as he's becoming very powerful over time to the point where it'll cause problems for Board in the future. This is actually something that was brought up early in the show with the Asaka stuff, where it was noted that his fusion rate with his ace was actually particularly high compared to Tachibana. Unfortunately for Board, this pursuit seems to have the opposite effect on Kenzaki, as it just makes him more dedicated to his duty as a rider, and after his hard-won victory against the category King I mentioned earlier, he achieves his ultimate form, King Form. King Form is a fusion of all 13 cards in Kenzaki's suit, granting him power way past what anyone at Board could have ever imagined. It's a usage of undead power that could threaten the user turning into undead themselves, and he channels this power immediately into a complete and total annihilation of the first trial undead. King Form is a bit of a callback to Kuga's ultimate form, being something so strong it's basically unbeatable, but also being so dangerous that it starts to seriously up the tension in the show, as most of the reactions from the cast, heroic or villainous, seem to be a reaction of fear rather than awe. Shiori finds out that her father is alive and begins to pursue him, but Yoshito cannot be bothered as he's laser focused on developing new trials and continuing his research. This builds emotionally, especially with the further development that Yoshito actually died back when he unsealed the undead, and that he himself is a trial undead. The deliverer of this revelation? Chairman Tennoji, the true boss hog at Board. And yes, Tennoji is portrayed by Koji Moritsugu, the man that played Dan Moriboshi in Ultra 7 back in 1967. This plot thread with Yoshito finally comes to a close in a really great fight scene in the rain, where Yoshito finally gets to apologize to Shiori for his negligence and they have one last moment before he dies. As this plotline zooms out to be more than just about Yoshito and Shiori, and you learn about Tennoji as the organization's chairman, it throws the whole thing into a more negative light. Board is the employer of two of our heroes, but think about where Board's been. What have they truly done for our heroes outside of paying peanuts? I mean, the show makes it abundantly clear over and over, as a joke, that Board's pay is pretty shit, especially when you consider the danger of what our heroes are getting into each week. Kenzaki's literally kicked out of his tiny apartment in the first episode, and he remarks all the time about how the pay sucks and that's one of the many reasons Mutsuki shouldn't look up to writers. And poor Tachibana, he cares so much about this job that it honestly feels like he's being strung along emotionally by the entire thing. He keeps following after old Board fogies to try to make sense of all this undead business, and never gets any farther. Thankfully, that tendency in him ends with Yoshito's arc, and once Tennoji comes around, he's so over-the-top evil that it's pretty easy for our all-too-trusting heroes to see exactly what's up. Turns out, surprise surprise, Tennoji has been behind this shit the whole time, and that his goal in awakening the undead, the true goal, was to put on a sham battle fight, to fix it in his favor so that he can win by becoming fused with an undead himself, and remake the world in his image. The undead he's fusing with is an artificial card, the Cerberus. In their encounters with Tennoji, Kenzaki and Tachibana come to a breaking point with their quote-unquote providers, and toss their duties aside to appropriate their belts for their own needs, to destroy Tennoji and stop his evil plans. This is at a point soon after Mutsuki's reclamation of his Lango powers, so it's here that we get an incredible moment of all four riders standing as one against one entity, against the organization that birthed the very rider systems they used to fight. That common Kamen Rider theming of the source of power being the same as the enemy comes full circle. I also have to wonder about how much of this scene displays a sort of past versus present theming. especially with both Blade and Ultra 7 sharing a theme of condemning reckless, inhuman scientific progress. Either way, all 4 of our riders ride their bikes super awesome-like and proceed to kick the ass of a literally 60-year-old man. Also, quick shout out to old Tenoji's monster suit. That thing kicks fucking ass. Especially the version with the damn old head poking out the chest. That's so sick. So yeah, it's a 4-on-1 fight. They kick the dude's ass pretty hard. And it's episode 46. What the hell? Wasn't this guy built up as the final boss? Well, yeah, this show's like, honestly, it just does a remarkable job at constantly faking you out in the end. There's a lot of reason to believe that Tenoji would be the final boss of Blade, what with him being a literal, actual boss and being the one that set up the sham battle fight. Thing about that is that the battle fight is a lot bigger than Board or Tenoji, or even the world at large. Tenoji, over the course of his short time on the show, kept referring to his victory as finally talking to God. God in this case being a giant twisted monolith. Literally like the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey. But with a twist. A twist on... you guys get it. This monolith is mostly referred to as the Creator by the undead, and it's the great unknowable overseer of the battle fight, so there's still that to take care of, I guess. And there just so happens to only be one undead left outside of Hajime, another category king. The tension around what'll happen to Hajime gets absolutely unbearable in these last few episodes of the show. There are constantly glances to his position by the cast, a constant mistrust that they just can't shake. This is the world-ending Joker, and he's just chilling out with a girl he's befriended. Something is revealed by the final undead about Hajime to the audience, though, being that he was in the midst of battling our final undead some time ago at the place that Amane's father died, and it was during this battle that they both accidentally killed him. Amane's father inexplicably decided to put his trust in Hajime though, and gave him a photo with Amane and her mother to take care of. Ever since that encounter, Hajime's felt a sense of duty to keep that promise to Amane's father, and that duty slowly turned into genuine joy in being around these people, and learning about human compassion and love from them, and in turn providing it back. Hajime gained his human form by the human undead who just surrendered to the Joker towards the beginning of the current battle fight, and he had always been confused about why that happened. I find it really interesting that we never get concrete reasons as to why the human undead or Amane's father suddenly give Hajime this kindness seemingly out of nowhere. It only further illustrates just how random it can feel sometimes to be the recipient of kindness, and how it makes you want to provide that feeling to someone else. And on top of that, here's Kenzaki just trusting Hajime completely off of, like, vibes. You know, like, Kenzaki can just feel that Hajime is good at heart, and if he just trusts in him, things will work out fine. There's a peace and love within Kenzaki that's just captivating, not only to Hajime but to the viewer as well. He may not be the most complex character or the best character in this sort of archetype, but in the context of this show, in a show where all of its world building and aesthetic design is built around competition and rivalry, to have a protagonist that so decisively rejects that, to the point where the other writers are just kind of led to agree, is just incredible. Kamen Rider Blade is like Ryuki if the central characters just like believed in Shinji and tried to work with him. It's like Faiz if everyone talked it out. I'm oversimplifying, but I've been watching these first several Heisei shows all in a row, and the contrast is just too much not to mention. Characters just act differently in Blade, and it can totally just be up to taste, but I love the way that things coalesce in this final arc. It's not so much a series of final battles or any out-of-nowhere final villain. The final arc in Blade is simply built around a complex moral question that our heroes have to answer. How can everyone walk away from the situation alive and more or less happy? Things would be so much easier if our characters were more cruel, and if they could just destroy and feel remorse later. In the midst of the constant back and forth here over Hajime, there's a point where Tachibana has a perfect chance to seal him before this gets really bad. But he just can't. and he goes off and seals the final undead instead, in a battle that causes both of them to fall off a cliff to their demise. Now, Hajime is the only undead left, and the world starts to crumble. The Joker has won, and Tachibana has disappeared, and after some fruitless endeavors by Kenzaki and Mutsuki to try and build the strength to seal their friend, Mutsuki gets hospitalized. The world is literally ending, and Kenzaki still puts trust in his friend. There has to be another way. Doing away with Hajime cannot be the only way this ends. Kenzaki, still bound to his duties as a rider, fights on in the face of inescapable death. It's clear Hajime still mentally has a hold on his Joker state, but he can't quite help the destruction that comes from his winning the battle fight. He's still founded in himself to protect Amane even now, even at the end of the world, where everything should cease to matter. Kenzaki fights on, focusing on the hordes of dark roaches rather than the source himself, Hajime. Why is that? The tension builds, you're asking questions. And then we reach the final episode. And it turns out Kenzaki has had a plan this whole time, and it's his most reckless yet. He's leaving everything up to chance, hoping that this show of love and trust will finally work. It turns out Tachibana and Mutsuki are fine, though unable to transform. This current situation is almost worse than a simple death. Now they have to watch the world burn, and Kenzaki's the only one that might be able to end it alone. He encounters Hajime in the forest, and they begin to have their final battle, both having obviously reached their limit. Kenzaki looks like shit. He's been fighting for so long, and Hajime looks desperate. He just wants to end the suffering. They fight, clearly not having the heart for it. The battle ends as quickly as it began, and Hajime pleads for Kenzaki to seal him and end this. However, Kenzaki undoes his transformation and begins to bleed green. The prolonged use of king form has done what everyone feared in turning Kenzaki into a Joker himself. However, this is exactly what saves everyone in the end, because there are now 2 undeads in the world, so the battle fight will have to continue until one is left. The current wave of destruction will cease so as to give our 2 fighters the environment that they need for their final battle. However, if both of our combatants don't want to fight, then the battle fight will just simply not end. This not only circumvents the need to defeat and seal Hajime, but also gets around having to fight an unknowable entity like the Creator. Like I mentioned earlier though, the Joker is kind of a weird instinctual werewolf type of thing. So unfortunately, as long as Kenzaki and Hajime are together, they will be driven to have their final battle. Kenzaki will not allow this though, as Hajime has a family to watch over now, doesn't he? Kenzaki takes it upon himself to leave everything behind, so everyone else can live in peace. I cannot express to you all just how much I love this fucking ending. It is so endlessly smart and fascinating, and caps off the series in a great, suitably final way. It's bittersweet, but given the constant push and pull between its cast being all well-meaning people, and the world building being cruel and rigid, it's about the best ending that this show could have ever wished for. In Tokusatsu, hell, in superhero fiction, and anything. It is super rare to see an ending this good and this expertly pulled off. Sure, there's some additional material here and there that tries to sully it, but the show is the show, and you need no more than these 49 episodes to fully understand and grasp its brilliance. This final act of the show, these last 19 episodes, really put in the work to make this show just a true all-timer. In Mutsuki's plotline, we get some awkward, goofy characterization and a coming-of-age story that feels genuinely earned, and one that understands the gravity and responsibility of heroism. In Board, and particularly in Tachibana's place in it, we get a pretty sweeping critique of capitalism and of loyalty to your employers, the very same that abuse you for monetary gain while you try to simply survive off the tiny pay they so lovingly grant you with each paycheck. And in Kenzaki and Hajime, we get love. Pure, trusting love. Something I've kind of failed to bring up in previous videos that I've honestly been kind of saving for this one is the fact that Kamen Rider is really gay. It just really truly is. There's Godai and Ichijo, Shinji and Ren, Takumi and Kiba, Kenzaki and Hajime. These shows are in part characterized by a love and understanding shared by two men at the center of the show. This does not by any means have to be overtly sexual or even read like that. And this is also not always the case in every Rider show. But it is an undeniable long-running aspect of the series that persists to this very day. And God, I just think Blade is my favorite example of this, and that'll always be the case. I mean, come on, it's forbidden love, baby! That's the shit that really tugs at the heartstrings, and this show smacks you right in the face with it at the very end. Kenzaki places an absolutely immense amount of trust in Hajime here at the ending, just so he can go to sleep at night knowing that Hajime can live out his days, taking care of the people he loves most, living in peace in a brand new world. And Hajime, he can live among humans and learn why and how this species, and this world that they inhabit, could have created someone as kind and loving as Kazuma Kenzaki. They'll be thinking of each other forever. And if that is not some kind of romantic, then I seriously do not know shit. The actress for Kenzaki and Hajime made a fucking ring. It's called Eternal Marriage. They know what they're about. I don't blame you guys if you think this is too much or something. This show is all kinds of weird and uneven, with a myriad of production problems plaguing the whole thing. I get it. It's not as simple a thing to love as something like Kuga or Double or Build or what have you. I love those shows too, and it's a lot easier for me to put together exactly why. But none of those shows inspire quite as much passion in my heart as Blade. I seriously cannot get enough of talking about why this show is so great, and why I think it's perfectly imperfect, and why it will always be my favorite Tokusatsu show, unless something absolutely just insane happens. It's a weird Battle Royale meets Resident Evil meets Justice League meets Shonen Jump meets Days of Our Lives thing that has plagued my mind for years. It's probably one of the things that helped me realize I wasn't straight. It helped me come out of a huge bout of depression back in 2013 or so. And it's helped me overcome some really shitty and horrible feelings right now in 2020. In a world that constantly feels cruel and confusing, where corporations are as abusive, if not more abusive than Board is, where they are forcing people to work in the midst of a large-scale worldwide pandemic. In a world where loving distance is the name of the game when it comes to maintaining the relationships I hold most dear right now, this show has been a healing presence. Kamen Rider Blade is fucking goofy, awesome, heartbreaking, original, corny, sweet, effective, and perfect all at the same time. There are surely other shows, maybe even this very show, that make you feel the same way, that heal you and understand you in the same way that this does for me. Maybe in the same way, these shows will inspire you all to make loving, overly long, overly sentimental videos talking about why they're so good, and so you can inspire a conversation about your favorite thing. In a world where you're forced to find every little comfort and cherish it like you'll never get another one for as long as you live, that is a precious thing to do for yourself. Surely, all of you feel something similar about a show or a comic or something. And I just think that that's beautiful.